Hey guys, OG Albina here, bringing you guys SPL Draft Notes Week 4, the show that talks everything and anything SPL related. If you guys are excited for this week's episode, be sure to drop a like on the video as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if everybody who watches the video today drops a sub, we should hit it pretty soon, so I would really appreciate your help and your support along the way. And yeah, with that being said, quick little intro, let's just jump right into last week's games. Alrighty, let's jump right into it. First up, our first matchup we're going to talk about is Nexus versus Leo, and we'll talk about a couple of these games more later on, including this one. But Nexus and Leo both looking for their first win this week. Nexus was able to do so off some very aggressive plays. He did get fortunate at certain points with certain crits and, you know, turns and rolls going his way, but that's Pokemon. I think he positioned his Iron Moth really well as a Pokemon we talked about last week in last week's show, doing really well. He positioned the Spec set really well, doing like 90% to an Infernape with the fire move was very funny to see, so that was definitely awesome. And he's able to take home a nice and convincing 4-0 victory, putting himself on the path to, you know, string together some wins. Then, next up, from one Haxy game to another, we have Emvee versus Mefesto. Emvee dodged a very clutch Power Whip from a Serena on his Manaphy, allowing him to really get a lot more mileage out of that Manaphy than he realistically should have. Not to say that he automatically lost the game if he got hit with the Power Whip, but it kind of took it out of Mefesto's hands a little bit, which is definitely unfortunate. But like I said, that's Pokemon, and unfortunately, it just doesn't go in our favor sometimes, and be able to take home a nice 2-0 victory off of the fact of some pretty good fortune. So shouts to Evil Emvee. Then we have Thomas versus Drewby. This one was pretty crazy. I originally had Drewby for this game. In fact, this is actually the only game I got wrong in pick'ems this week, so shoutouts to me for that one, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I originally had Drewby in this game matchup-wise, but Thomas pulled up with the Raichu and absolutely demolished with it. It went crazy. It was really cool to see the Nasty Plot Protect Raichu do so well, and it made sense on matchup. I mean, the combination of Electric plus Water just absolutely ripped Drewby's team, and it was no different here. I mean, it absolutely popped off, so it was really cool to see Thomas keep the win streak going. Both coaches were trying to stay undefeated, and Thomas was able to do so. Then we have Joey versus Kyle. Again, another game where a lot of hacks kind of really influenced the game. There was a really clutch turn towards the end of the game where Clefable was very nimble and decided to bob and weave and jump out of the way of a gunk shot from a really offensive Mew, which was a really smart bring by Kyle, really allowing that Clefable to kind of sit on the field and get a lot more mileage out of it. Again, wouldn't say that the game was necessarily decided if he hit that gunk shot, but I think it was definitely in Kyle's favor if he was able to hit it. Unfortunate for him, I think they both played very well, though. It was a very fun game to watch. Joey is going to take home the 2-0 victory, though, keeping his win streak going. Then we had Danny versus Uzi. Uzi able to move to 2-1 on the back of a 4-0 victory. KyleAye going absolutely insane. There was a couple questionable plays from Danny, some overplays in my opinion, like, you know, expecting no Terra Blast Ground into, you know, the Jirachi when it's not like Jirachi really immediately threatened the KyleAye anyways, and I think kind of the overplaying and the tilt got to him a little bit, and Uzi was able to kind of run away with that one pretty scot-free. There wasn't really much that Danny could do. I also like the ground spam approach from Uzi with Terra Ground KyleAye, and then both Ursaluna and the Great Tusk definitely did really well, and he played great, so able to take home a nice 4-0, very convincing win. Then we have Vivid versus Viz, and oh my goodness, the Basculin. Now, once I saw Team Preview and I saw the Basculin, I was like, oh no, I really hope that Vivid doesn't Terra his Abomasnow, because once that guy is Terra'd, especially into a ground typing, because it wasn't water this week, oh my goodness, did the Basculin go crazy. I helped Vivid prep a little bit this week, and I think he was originally Terra Water Abomasnow, and changed it last second, and it ended up kind of being a game changer, because the little fish, the little guppy, as Viv was saying, went absolutely crazy. Viz was able to bounce back after a loss last week to Emvee, and move himself up to 2-1, keeping himself above 500. Then lastly, we had Shuckleking versus CBAD, a very eventful game to watch, obviously. There was some chaos going in the background of Shuckle's, recording setup, and he unfortunately brought the contrary agility Enamorous and didn't notice it for a while, so it was a very entertaining game. It was a very funny one. But CBAD was able to take home the victory, really off of the back of the crazy amount of pressure that the lone Raichu put on earlier in the game, and the fact that he was able to Healing Wish it up. I think he played very well, and I think he positioned really well. I really love the new electric terrain aspect to CBAD's team. So it was really fun to watch, and definitely a pretty close one despite all of the shenanigans that kind of occurred early game, but definitely a really cool one. Now you can see our pick'em score at the bottom of the screen. We have officially moved above 500. I told you guys I went 6-1 this week. give me a round of applause in the comments down below. By far my best week. I went 3 and 4 the previous weeks, so I was able to kind of analyze these matchups a little bit better, only getting the Drewby versus Thomas one wrong, where I had Drewby over Thomas. So definitely some good stuff there. And yeah, with that being said, speaking of pick'ems, actually no, not speaking of pick'ems, we're gonna jump on into some highlight games and some really cool plays from last week. Alright, like we mentioned before, I gotta talk about that Raichu going absolutely crazy in this game, Thomas versus Drewby. Again, the one game that I got wrong this week, it was off the back of that little electric mouse making me look like a dummy picking against Thomas in this game. Going absolutely crazy. Like I said, the combination of electric plus water did really well here. The defensive typing of grass was also very solid, and the protect tech was also great for things like low kicks, being able to avoid first impressions and things like that, which would obviously kind of blow you up otherwise. So definitely very smart from Thomas here, and he positioned the Raichu really well, and what was my opinion, a pretty disadvantageous matchup. So Thomas played pretty well. Shoutouts to him. Good win this week. Again, we mentioned it prior, but we gotta talk about the little guppy that could. Big Basculin finally pulling up and being offensive. No Max Spadef rest talk sets in this game. We had a really offensive Scarf Basculin going absolutely crazy, and I love the Aqua Jet tech on top of it, really saving Viz the game because of the Cleaver that got up the 2 Trailblazes. Vivid actually put himself in a pretty okay position to win, but having that Aqua Jet tech alongside that Terra Water was really powerful and a great way of revenging that thing if it did get out of hand, as well as some other offensive pieces on Vivid's team, like the Chiyu if it was a potential Scarf variant or something of the sort. So very good prep by Viz. I think he was able to get in the Basculin a lot, and it was able to just pick KOs left and right. It's always fun to see like the low tier Terra captains absolutely pop off and do really well, and Viz was able to do so again this week. He's really been using the low tier Terras very well in these first 3 weeks, so definitely a lot of fun. GG to them both though. And then lastly, we got to talk about Nexus versus Leo. Like I said, I think Nexus played this game very well. Now, he definitely got pretty, lucky in certain points. I mean, that Hippowdon was just, I don't know, maybe it was his birthday or something like that. But he got super lucky with that. But I was very impressed with how well Nexus positioned offensively this game. I think a lot of the times when Nexus struggles, he positions more defensively, plays a little bit more passively. But in this game in particular, I felt he positioned his offense in really well. He was able to bring in that Specs Moth and click Overheat and Sludge Wave, and got the nice lucky Sludge Wave poison as well, which was really clutch, and was able to do really well with his offense, and in particular that Moth. I know it maybe didn't get as many kills as the lucky Hippo, but I think that was the difference maker in this game, and earned him the thumbnail of this game. So good stuff, Nexus. Good win, and yeah, getting the first one is always nice. You just gotta get the monkey off the back, and from there you're good to go. So good win. Alrighty, we can finally start talking about matchups for the week. First up is going to be Thomas versus Danny here, the Copenhagen Gallades versus the Waukegan Wakes. First, from Thomas' side, I think Azumarill is going to be very important, and checking that Walking Wake, which goes pretty darn crazy otherwise. You could also go like an AV, what do you call it? An AV Glowking, but that thing can get knocked off. It can also get pushed through a little bit easier in my opinion, especially with the combination of hazards, and I think Glowking is better used in other ways in this game, like facilitating potential other hail offense, resetting weather, and things like that. So personally, I think the best check to that wake is going to be Azu, and it's a very important one at that. Does switch in pretty darn well, and it spreads knockoffs and play rush really well. It's not actually very easily switched into on Danny's team, so something to keep in mind there. Blitz score is also very important here. It checks things like shocks, and it gets up either spikes or rocks very freely, and I think hazards are going to be very important for Thomas in order for him to win this game, is getting up those hazards and getting in his offense and clicking buttons, obviously. Glowking, like I said, I don't think it's going to be AV. I think it's going to want to run a chilly reception set to reset weather, get rid of that sun, because I think sun can get very overwhelming for Thomas if he doesn't get rid of it quick. Even the lower tier options like Charizard Shiftry do really well. Obviously, there's the Wake. And even just the Ninetales offensively is kind of scary outside of your own Glowking and your own Azumarill. We want to take a little bit of pressure off the Azumarill as well. We don't want to take a Will-O-Wisp. We don't want to take a Solar Beam, whatever it may be, which I think is really nice. So I think it's definitely going to want to go like a chilly reception set to reset the weather, and potentially even set it up for things like backs to set up, or just take hits very easy, or even Sandslash to come in and do some work. Who knows? Ice plus Ground is really good against Danny's team in particular, and that's kind of what I wanted to mention with both the Sandslash, but more so the Baxcalibur. The combination of Ice plus Ground and Earthquake is going to hit this team very hard. It can either go like a Choice Band set, it can go a Charty Berry set for the Lycanroc, potentially trying to revenge it. and go either SD, EQ, scale, in my opinion, or it can go like a choice band set and just kind of try and catch whatever it needs to catch and hit it really hard. I really do like the Ice Shard priority against this on offense, though, in particular for things like Shocks, Weakened Wake, and things like that. I think it could definitely be really clutch. Even Shiftry, which seems really, really strong here, to be completely honest, which is nice. And then Zarude also looks very good here, in my opinion. I think really the only check to it is going to be something like an Okidogi, but I think like a Fizz-Def Glowking is going to be good in checking the Okidogi. I know you do have to worry about knockoff and high horsepower, but there's potential resist barriers for those depending on what you think is going to come. Like, I could definitely see it going Cold Burn in this game because it also covers like as a Shiftry lore. But other than that, other than the Okidogi, I think that the Zarude is actually very, very strong here, either with a Scarf variant, or even like a Swords Dance variant, or an AV variant, or whatever, maybe even a Resist Berry. It looks very good here. Now, on Danny's side, I think 4 attacks Okidogi looks really incredible. We just mentioned it. Really, there's not much switches to dual stabs, and then Ice Punch plus either knockoff or high horsepower. It does incredibly well. I would personally go high horsepower because not only does it hit the Glowking, it also hits the Tauros a little bit harder. The utility of knocking off items is great, but I feel like you don't really need to when you're kind of just coming in and clicking buttons and being strong as heck. So, in my opinion, I think probably stabs, Ice Punch, high horsepower in this game, just to hit as many things hard as humanly possible. You can either go AV, you can go a Resist Berry, or you can even go like an Extra Belt or something like that, in my opinion. So definitely a really strong Pokemon. Shocks plus Hazards plus Wake Flip Turning is really going to wear down this team. I don't think that Danny can really bring the Fortress into the Sun matchup, and it's not like if Alolan Sandslash comes, it's going to be a spinner, so because of that, I don't think he has a great removal in this game, and that, plus Sandy Shocks coming in, and things like Walking Wake, Clicking Flip Turn, as spikes and rocks go up and things like that, is going to make it very difficult for Thomas to deal with later on, especially with that Okidogi, and especially with that Lycanroc. That's the highlight on this matchup. I think it does absolutely incredibly. Look at Choice Band and tell me what deals with Choice Band with any type of hazard support. Absolutely nothing is the answer that I'm looking for. Nothing takes on Choice Band Lycanroc. So I think if Danny can get up hazards and kind of whittle and flip turn things around, it doesn't take much for everything to be put in range of Lycanroc. Like literally everything. We gotta hit some stone edges, but I mean, other than that, you're gonna be in a really good spot. I just think that Shukadarachi, I forgot to mention, I kind of skipped over in my notes on accident, but Shukadarachi is really nice for the ice offense and Baxcalibur and Sandslash. So that could obviously be very, very nice. But yeah, I am actually going to lean Danny this week. I think he's going to get his first win on the back of Lycanroc plus Hazards plus Momentum. If he does that, I think he actually is in a pretty good spot to do so. Next up, we have Mefesto versus Pokeaimmd. On Mefesto's side, I think Samurott looks very strong. Either an AV set or a Lumberry set can be very solid at checking a lot of the special offense and things like Dragapult, Heatran, and Azelf. Deals with a lot of them very well. I think you probably just go 4 attacks. Now, there are things that can switch into you decently well. A bulkier Quackleval and Clefable can all switch into you pretty decently, but if we can pressure up hazards, get them up, stop spins potentially, and put the Quackleval in a really awkward spot with things like Gengar probably lurking in the back, things like Zapdos baiting a static, and things like that. I think hazards are going to be really solid from the Samurott to get them up and really, really whittle down Joe's team, and just having that solid, you know, really offensive check to a lot of the special offense that really goes crazy here. Speaking of special offense, I think Zapdos does really well. A more offensive set looks really solid prior to the Torterra Terra Electriking, sorry. If it does come, I do think it's going to probably be Terra Electric because of the Zapdos in particular. But it looks really strong. The only issue is if you go too offensive, things like Quackleval can get out of hand. So maybe you still do go pretty bulky, but regardless, even if it's just offensive Zapdos, I think that not much switches into it very well. So I think it'll be really strong. It'll kind of volt around, and if things like Heatran are coming in, we'll talk about Heatran a little bit, but that's good if Heatran's coming in and taking chip, in my opinion. So, definitely think at least Zapdos offensively looks good, even if it doesn't come offensively, if that makes any sense. Boost Cinderace is also very strong. I think it struggles with 4 Moveset Syndrome, because it wants Pyro Ball, it wants High Jump Kick or Low Kick, maybe Low Kick, because it's Heatran's the only thing you're hitting with Low Kick, and you don't want to miss into the Pult, or whatever it may be. Gunk Shot and Sucker Punch are like the 5 moves that you really, really want. But you can't fit them all. You also can't fit U-Turn in that set if that's the case, which is also a little bit unfortunate. So I think like a Boot Cinderace is really strong. It's just a matter of breaking down the coverage that you really want in that matchup. I think Florges is probably the safest check to a lot of the special offense, in particular the Pulp. It also keeps the rest of the team healthy. You really wish that Florges still had access to Heal Bell, because man oh man, it would be wishing and Heal Belling into an AV Samurott all freaking game, which would be really, really cool. And it would obviously stop a lot of the annoying hazards that would potentially be going up. I also like Gengar a lot in this matchup. I think as a Scarfer, it outpaces things like the Torterra. I believe I could be tripping, but I'm pretty sure it does. It outpaces a ton of this build, in fact, and the normal type is something like Grafaiai. So if Grafaiai doesn't come, I think that Shadow Ball spam is a very viable endgame option. It also beats down the Clefable. It's faster than a +1 Quaquaval, which is another really important thing. It's always nice to have insurance against that guy. So I think that's really nice. And then Sixlot can really be a majority of like the rest of the members. Sandaconda isn't bad. Serena isn't bad. And then Scizor and Fergraph are kind of the two that I expect the most to probably come. Fergraph actually also checks Pult really, really well. Outside of like U-turns and stuff like that, but you can always Terra, which is, you know, a nice thing. I think Florges is probably the better check if you're going to be tearing anyways, but it's something that can definitely come. And Scizor, while it's kind of, you know, annoyed by Heatran, if you catch that thing with a close combat, it's absolutely nuked, and outside of the Heatran, nothing really switches in. And again, if Heatran is coming in, that means that it's taking damage and it's not, you know, as offensively threatening because it's being forced to come in, take damage. If it takes a CC, I mean, you're removing one of the biggest threats to your team. Speaking of which, I do have Heatran as the highlight mon. I mean, I think offensively it looks absolutely incredible. Its dual stabs plus earth power hit everything so hard. The only, like, reliable check on this team is going to be something like Dragonair coming off the bench, which isn't a good Pokemon. And then something like the Samurott, which has the potential of taking burns, really getting whittled down by things like Magma Storm, and it doesn't stay healthy long enough to really check it. So that's something to keep in mind. I do think that Florges can Wish Pass into the Samurott multiple times, especially if the Heatran is coming in on the Florges, so that's something to keep in mind. But I think like a Scarf set or a Choppleberry set from the Heatran can be very strong in this matchup and really do a ton of damage to Mefesto's team. I think Pulse is kind of relegated to a U-turn bot here with the different responses that Mefesto has, but honestly that's not bad. I think that plus hazards from things like Overqwell, and then Pokemon like Quaquaval and Thundurus, and even maybe an Azelf or a Torterra can really overwhelm Mefesto, do a ton of damage to his team, to where something like the Heatran can come in and clean, or maybe an Agility Thundurus, or maybe the Quaquaval comes in Aqua Steps. I think that Joey's offense with all of his hazards is incredibly overwhelming. I think this matchup in general from both sides is very offensive, and it can 100% swing either which way, really depend on who grabs the most early momentum, in my opinion. I am going to lean Joey in this matchup, but I do think that both teams have a good shot, and they both have some really big threats. I also didn't mention Thundurus. I think Thundurus is really good in this matchup too. Another Pokemon that's really strong, and actually checks Zapdos well, which honestly kind of makes it to where it kind of has to come. It's a Volt Switch blocker, and it eats up Hurricane, so that's obviously really nice. But yeah, I'm going to take Joey just on a slight margin in this one. Next up, we're going to talk about Emvee versus CBAD here. Now, with Emvee, I think Manaphy and Sneasler in particular look really strong. Either a Scarf or a Banded. Sneasler can really put on a ton of pressure. Banded in the sense that it breaks through its conventional checks. Things like Donphan are not going to want to take Banded CC. Things like the Cresselia taking Banded CC or Banded U-turn from it, potentially getting poisoned, makes it to where it doesn't really want to switch in on a Dire Claw afterwards, which can be really obnoxious. I think actually the best check that thing is going to be something like Hisui and Quillfish with the Intimidate, but if it does, you know, get off that Intim and be pre-fizzed F1, it's still taking neutral damage from CC, obviously, but two, it doesn't have any reliable recovery, and you're able to get pretty good momentum on that guy, which I think is really clutch here. And Manaphy offensively looks absolutely incredible. I think some kind of Tail Glow set looks really strong. Even maybe a Take Heart set could be really good, but in all honesty, I think some kind of Tail Glow set, maybe even either a Yachi or a Rindo. I'm a big, if you guys haven't told, by the way, I'm a big Resist Berry Manaphy guy. I think it's really solid in kind of taking out its own checks, but it looks really strong here, and I really like it a lot in this matchup. Again, maybe it goes Take Heart, maybe it goes Tail Glow. I think some kind of setup set is very strong. I think in general, the top 6 is going to be Emvee's best bet. Ursaluna Blood Moon also has very little counterplay. I think some kind of Calm Mind set could be very strong. The only counterplay to it is an opposing Calm Mind Cresselia, and if the Cresselia isn't like Calm Mind Psyshock, it's probably not going to beat it down 1v1. So that's something very important to note. I think that the Goodra is a requirement for the bundle. We'll talk a little bit about the bundle. I think that the Weezing is a requirement for things like Hawlucha and Ogerpon. It also defogs away spikes, and we'll talk about the spikes. Then you're thinking, oh, but he has an Espeon. Doesn't matter at all. But Goodra is going to be really important for the bundle. And I just think Espeon is a strong Pokemon in general in this matchup. I think that potentially like a Terra Fairy set is going to be really solid, like a Calm Mind variant. But I also think the SPL can actually be a Calm Mind Terra Fairy Sableye. I think Calm Mind Terra Fairy Sableye can also be very, very obnoxious for a team like this, and really struggles, or CBAD's team really struggles with beating that down and tearing it down. So I think that's really important. Now, as for CBAD's side, I think the one big saving grace this matchup, because I do think it's Emvee's favorite outside of one Pokemon, is going to be Bundle. Again, Bundle gets like kind of the centerpiece highlight of this matchup because there is no Freeze Dry plus Hydro Pump resist. There typically isn't great answers to it in general, but it's just going to be the Goodra. Goodra without any reliable recovery, without any Wish going into it, really. So, if spikes can go up from the Ogerpon, which is one, probably not going to invite in an Espeon anyways, but two, has Mold Breaker anyway, so it always gets up the spikes, is going to be very tough for that Goodra to deal with this thing long term. I think a potential spec set is great. You can even go Scarf if you're really worried about different speed control options that Emvee has access to. I think that the bundle has no resist, and it can be really strong. I said I think a requirement too is going to be a Spadef Cresselia with some kind of Calm Mind variant, and maybe you can go a little bit more Fizdef. I don't know the calcs off the top of my head, but a Calm Mind set is really strong here, and it's really the only Ursaluna check at all. It has to come, or Ursaluna kind of just cooks the entire build, so gotta be very careful about that. I think that the potential of Quillfish being another spiker is also very likely, because not like the Espeon really wants to switch in on the Poison Dark type very often, so you can be pretty aggressive there. And I think that there is an end game for Hawlucha potentially, if the Weezing is coming in and taking IV Cudgels from the Ogerpon and getting very willed down. Once that happens, I definitely think that the Hawlucha can come in and win the game, which also might be a reason for Sneasler to go some kind of Unburden set to stop the Hawlucha from doing it, or maybe even like a weird Mirror Herb tech. I think that could be pretty cool as well. Despite the bundle having a crazy matchup though, I am going to go Emvee's side because I think he does have some counterplay. He has Defog to keep away the spikes for the Goodra. He could even probably not go AV and maybe go some kind of Rest variant, but then you're also worried about, you know, the electric terrain from Chaser's side, so maybe you don't end up going that. But I do think that the bundle is very strong, but Emvee's matchup is just a little bit stronger. I'm going to lean him this week. Next up, we have Leo versus Drewby here. From Drewby's side, I think that Hail offense is actually very strong. I think this Titan in particular, Ice plus Ground, is always going to be strong in general, but it hits Leo's team very hard. He's kind of forced into a Shuka or on either one or both of Toxapex and Tinkaton. So I think that could be very strong and very scary to deal with and really kind of break down Leo's team very well. I love Banded Arcanine in this game. I think it does really well if you can get it on those things that are slower than you or that don't threaten you. Head Smash and Flare Blitz are going to do a ton of damage. Now you do have to kind of decide what's going to come in. I think you can pretty freely click Head Smash the entirety of the game because it's going to nuke the Toxapex, and the other Pokemon that can come in and resist Rock aren't going to appreciate Banded Head Smash, and it chips them down for other things in your team like your Titan potentially. So I think that's definitely really strong. Ogre feels like a very solid spiker here. It does get checked by things like Toxapex pretty darn well, but you get up spikes, you whittle things down, you're able to, you know, get things in range of your Banded Arcanine, whether it be Extreme Speed, Flare Blitz, or Head Smash is really nice, and your Titan, which is obviously going to be really cool. Then some kind of Fat Ments could also totally make sense for like Infernape and Decidueye to an extent, maybe even Hands if it's not an SD variant or it isn't carrying Ice Punch. You can actually check it very well, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it being like the most impactful Pokemon in the world because there is a lot of things that check Ments defensively. Hands can check it, obviously, but Tinkaton, the Toxapex, the Mamoswine revenges it always, and Torn always takes a hit as well pretty well. So, not the best offensively, but it could be nice defensively for the Infernape in particular, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Treads is also very solid as a flying resist and a Torn. Torn's pretty strong here, honestly, offensively. I think like a Hurricane, Focus Blast, Nasty Plots that could do well. There is the Slowking, but I don't know if Slowking is going to be able to go AV this week, and honestly, you 1v1 non-AV Slowkings. You don't got to worry about a Thunder Wave, but potentially like a Sub-Nasty Plot set, maybe even a Lumberry Nasty Plot set from Leo could come out. So I think that Treads could be a solid check, just something like that. I also think that a Weakness Policy set could be really strong to exploit things like Pex or weaker attacks from the Tornadus if it wants to go for a Heat Wave or something like that, or just weaker attacks in general that are technically super effective coverage. I think AV is a little bit better, but the surprise factor of the Weakness Policy could be very strong. Now, from Leo's side, I think Infernape plus Hands looks insane. The double Fighting Core, I love this Hands pickup from Leo, and it does really well in particular in this game. Look at the combination of just like Swords Dance, Drain Punch, Thunder Punch in this game. It just doesn't have any answers. You can go Ice Punch in the last slot, you can go Protect for residual lefties recovery, you can go so many things. You can also go Earthquake for the Pheasantipity, which would soft check you, otherwise you're able to kind of blow it up from there, which is nice, and it's a good neutral click into a lot of Pokemon on this team. Hands looks absolutely insane. If Sixft Hax seems required, I'd probably go Shuckleberry in a matchup like this, but you could also go something like a Rocky Helmet if you really wanted to, maybe even Black Sludge, but I do think that Shuka or Helmet are probably the most likely two items for it. Mammo is also incredibly strong in this game. Mamoswine does not have switch-ins. The bulky waters are not bulky, and they both get KO'd by Ice Cold Crash and Earthquakes and knockoffs and things like that. And I'm sure it's a great revenge tool for things like Ment, for things like a weakened Treads. It's just a very, very strong Pokemon overall. I'm definitely big on Mamoswine here. I feel like Leo's offense in general just looks really good here. I am going to go him in this matchup, because I think the double fighting plus Torn plus Mamoswine is really solid, plus nice defensive pivots and things like Pex, and just even Hands offensively is great, but also defensively it's great. So definitely a really solid Pokemon here. I am going to lean Leo in this matchup. Next up, we have NumbNexus versus Viz here, and on Nexus' side, oh my goodness, the Ogerpon Cornerstone looks insanely strong. Some kind of Swords Dance variant, Stone Axe plus Horn Leech or Power Whip absolutely cleaves through this team. There's nothing that wants to deal with it, and it really can get out of hand really, really fast. So I think that's going to be one of Nexus' best ways of really breaking down Viz's team. It can also be a very strong spiker in this game, getting up spikes early and then maybe SDing a little bit later on, because you can very viably just go IV Cudgel plus Horn Leech or Power Whip, Swords Dance, and then a spike set. So I think that Pokemon is incredible. A special attacking Valiant also does really well. I think that either a Calm Mindset or just 4 attacks I think is a little bit better. Rocking with an E-Belt or a Heavy Duty Boots in case you're really worried about the hazards game does really, really well into this team. Moonblast plus T-Bolt, Shadow Ball, and Psyshock do really, really well in this matchup. So I could definitely see it coming here against Viz. Mandibuzz is going to be an incredibly, incredibly important tool for Nexus here. It really does check that Annihilate pretty darn well. It at least gets slow U-turns off on it if it is a Taunt Annihilate. If it is not a Taunt or a Rest Annihilate, though, it does get Toxic by the Mandy, kind of gets shut down. It also checks Pokemon like the Dragonite, like the like a non-Specs Armarouge, like a Tinglu, like a Corviknight even as a pivot. It checked all of those Pokemon really well, and a non-choice Van Basculin. Well, so I really think that Mandibuzz is going to be a really important defensive piece for him. And then SD Gambit just feels very, very strong. I think either like Choppleberry or Weakness Policy, maybe a Shuckleberry, but I think Chopple or Weakness Policy does really, really well here. The combination of like Stab, Kowtow, Sucker, and then like a Low Kick for things like the Tinglu does really, really well. It is an incredibly strong asset in this matchup. The last slot, it could be something like Moth if it really needs to be. Or, I guess I've only talked about 4 Pokemon. I totally skipped over in my notes, but Boots Electrode looks really strong. Terra Ice is great here. Very hard to switch into. Terra Fairy might be even better. Just defensively, it's just a little bit more solid. You don't hit the Dragonite as hard, so you gotta be careful about that, but other than that, it looks really, really strong. And then last slot can be Moth. Stabs plus Psychic are pretty darn strong in this matchup. And it's a Pokemon that immediately breaks through something like Corviknight, which is going to be nice with the team that, you know, I've kind of structured and laid out here so far. So I definitely like Nexus' offensive matchup. Now, Viz definitely has some things it can do well as well. I think the Annihilate can get pretty out of hand, provided that some of the fat gets shoot down. Mainly that Mandibuzz. Mandibuzz is going to need to be pressured, worn down, because it really does take a lot for Annihilate to boost up and actually threaten the Mandibuzz. But if you can eliminate that Pokemon, maybe force it in with like an offensive Dragonite, wear it down, then the Ape can go to town. On top of that, Jolteon looks incredible. Terra Ice just grabs free Volts forever. There's not great switch-ins to it at all. And Terra Basculin also looks really, really strong and grabbing momentum. I think the best bet for Viz is going to be getting up hazards, maintaining momentum with Jolteon and Basculin, and then getting an offense like Annihilate, Dragonite, Armarouge, something like that to, you know, keep with the pressure. Even something like Scyther does really well and is really strong here. So yeah, I'm going to give the matchup to Nexus. I think that Viz has some pieces to win, but Nexus's offense is just really, really overwhelming here, in my opinion, and can kind of, you know, deal with Viz's pretty darn well. Next up is Shuckle versus Uzi here with the Philadelphia Stunkies against the Bullet Punch Club, and holy Meowscarada, it just doesn't have a switch in. I think that Bandit is incredible here. Knock, Flower Chick, U-turn, and then Sucker Punch probably. You can also go with a potential Play Rough or a Low Kick if you really want, but I don't think you really need it. Oh, sorry, that was terrifying. There's work going on outside. And of course, when I'm talking about the Shuckle game, work is happening outside my house, and I'm like, what the hell was that? But regardless, Meowscarada does really, really well in this matchup. It does not have any switch-ins. Fizdef, Fairy, Umbreon also might be the move this week. Pokemon like the Great Test, Pokemon like the Weavile, and even to an extent, Ursaluna, not really, really do this team dirty, and I think it's a great check to all of those things, especially if it's very physically defensive. Then Pokemon like Garchomp also do well. It can either take the Swords Dance sweeping approach after that Meowscarada has broken everything down, or more than likely it can take a Hazards approach, which I think are really, really solid here. Again, on top of things like Meowscarada, on top of things like Enamorus if they end up coming. And Bronzong is probably going to be a bring here as well, just because it checks, you know, some pretty scary things like the Gardevoir, and even potentially with a Culver Berry, checking things like Great Tusk and Weavile as well. Being able to take on all of those guys, which is nice, and it forms a great, you know, defensive core with the Umbreon. Umbreon can pass wishes into it pretty darn freely, which is really, really nice if something like Gardevoir wants to come in and take advantage of Umbreon. So that's obviously going to be very, very solid. Like I said, the last slot can either be like Enamorus or Monkey. I think Enamorus is better just because Earth Power has better neutral clicks into the switch-ins. But there is definitely a place for Monkey Dory in this matchup. But even Pokemon like Girder also do incredible in this game. Bulk Up is very strong. Basculegion is very strong. There's a lot of really strong pieces. Even the Talonflame, there's not great resist to the dual stab combination. So maybe an SD Talonflame makes an appearance. Who knows? Now, from Uzi, Banded Weavile looks insane in this matchup, man. I mean, Dark plus Ice is always going to be very strong, but in particular here, I think it is absolutely great. Tusk also looks really obnoxious with either just its stabs plus knockoff, and then either has Rapid Spin or a Rock move for the Talonflame if you're worried about that. Regardless, it looks really, really, really strong. The Rock move also covers something like an Enamorus that might want to switch in on your dual stab combination, which would also be, you know, pretty obnoxious for it. Cerulege also looks really strong. I think Ghost types in general are pretty strong against Shuckle's team. The moment he tears the Umbreon, especially, like an SD, you know, Poltergeist set could be really strong. Either weakness, like, and maybe potentially like a weakness policy, you know, weak armor set to boost up its speed and things like that. So I'm getting a little distracted by the noise outside. I don't know how Shuckle played his game last week with noise like this. That was honestly louder than the noise I'm hearing. But definitely looks really solid. Spidef Shuckleking is probably going to be a bring here as well. It takes on things like the Enamorus. It can take a hit from Garchomp and hit it with an Ice Beam. It gets up rocks. It can roost up and be annoying. So definitely a really, really solid Pokemon. And Scarf Gardevoir also seems very solid here. There is the Bronzong, but some kind of Scarfer with also like Healing Wish to get up your Weavile again, get up your Great Tusk, get up your Ursaluna could be really solid. And once the Bronzong goes down, it can definitely put in some like crazy work in this game. However, I am going to go Shuckle in this game. I think that Pokemon like Meowscarada just absolutely demolish Uzi, and there's not much you can do about it alongside Hazard Pressure and all of, you know, Shuckle's other offense. I am going to take Shuckle here. I think he has a pretty darn good matchup. Our last matchup for the day is going to be Vivid versus Kyle, the South Texas Sableyes versus the Miami Dawn fans. First up on Vivid's side, Goldango absolutely cooks in this game. There's not great switch-ins to Ghost plus Steel in this game. Either Scarf or some kind of Resist Berry and Nasty Plot looks really, really strong, especially if Vivid decides to bring Webs, which I think is very, very viable. I think it's going to be very strong here. Chi-Yu also looks very, very strong. Now, there is the prospect of a bulky Roaring Moon switching in, but I think another week where you run that Lava Plume tech to catch that Roaring Moon, burden on the switch in, really whittle it down, make it really a non-factor offensively. Makes it really solid, and it's easy to wear down if it's offensive too, and I know Kyle's team is very offense-oriented and offensively based, so being able to do that could be very, very solid, obviously. The combination of just Lava Plume, then either Overheat, Fire Blast, Flamethrower, whatever move you want to run for a Fire Stab, secondary to Lava Plume. Dark Pulse, Psychic looks really, really good here. Like, there's not much switch-in. Psychic is obviously for that Tauros, Paldea, Aqua. Now, Decidueye is also really strong here, because I think it checks a lot of Kyle's physical offense. It checks things like the Rillaboom, it checks things like the Bull really, really well, and even checks non-acrobatic Roaring Moons. But you can also Terra Steel and really just check the moon incredibly anyways, unless it's running a random Earthquake, which it might for the Chi-Yu, but honestly, you could probably eat that up pretty well as well. Unlike an Acro, which is going to blow you ass backwards, so you got to be very, very careful about that. And Enamorus is also very valuable defensively. It checks things like the Roaring Moon really, really well. And yeah, I think the rest of the offense and like the Hail offense is kind of covered by something like a Goldango. Again, like a Shuka Goldango looks really, really strong here. I really do think Goldango goes crazy. Now, on Kyle's side, Roy Moon has big endgame potential if Monster and Amherst and Decidueye are chipped down, but again, I want to reiterate, if the Roy Moon is the win con, it cannot switch into Chiyu. And if Chiyu is clicking buttons for free the whole game, it's going to be very hard for Kyle to keep momentum, so he has to kind of decide how he wants to do this. Terra Electric Bear, or more so even, Terra Ground Bear goes crazy. Ice Ground is such a good offensive combination, obviously, but in particular into Vivid, it goes crazy. Unless the Bomb Snow comes specifically for that Bear Tick to check it in that way, it's not looking good. And even then, it's not too hard to put a Bomb Snow in range of a coverage move, so... yeah, I think the Bear Tick is going to be a really solid win condition. And even then, DD Mew also looks really strong. The combination of, like, Psychic Fangs plus EQ and then either a fighting or poison coverage move also does incredibly well into a team like this. If I'm a Kyle, I'm trying to overwhelm with Veil offense. I'm bringing Veil and I'm bringing setup, offense, band, spec, as much offense as humanly possible, because I don't think that he can reliably check things like Goldango Chiyu over the course of the game, not to mention other offensive threats like Greninja, which is going to be obviously still very strong here. His defensive background does not have the staying power, and because of that, I am going to lead Vivid here. I think he just kind of needs to get the ball rolling with things like Chiyu, Goldango, and he'll go crazy. Again, the webs aspect is going to be a really clutch, bring if Vivid does decide to bring the Spite-Offs off the bench once again this week. But yeah, we're going to go Vivid here. That is going to be draft notes for week 4 of the SPL. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you think that I'm right, I'm wrong, I'm an idiot. Let me know what your matchups you're super excited for, what your favorite matchups for last week was, all that good stuff. Drive some comments up. Helps out the vid, drives the interaction. I appreciate it a ton, and I love responding to your guys' comments. They're my favorite things in the world. But yeah, again, drop a like if you enjoyed, sub if you're new, and I'll see you guys next week for week 5.